webinar on energy. I think we will solve the COVID problem. I think we will go to Mars. I think humanity will settle down in Mars and we will still have an energy problem. Pakistan will never solve its energy problem.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम नदीम साहब, कैसे हैं आप? कैसे हैं?
बिल्कुल ठीक। एनर्जी प्रॉब्लम इंशाल्लाह हमारे साथ हमेशा रहेगा और माशाल्लाह हम लोगों को एम्प्लॉयड रखेगा, जैसे कि हमारे बाकी प्रॉब्लम है। एजुकेशन का प्रॉब्लम भी वहीं का वहीं रहेगा, डेमोक्रेसी का प्रॉब्लम भी वहीं का वहीं रहेगा, सब प्रॉब्लम वहीं का वहीं रहेगा। हम बने इसीलिए थे कि प्रॉब्लम ना सॉल्व करें। Anyway, that's a brief introduction to energy webinar today. So we shall return to it a sixth time, trying to understand what the energy issue is. Today, Ahsan Zafar Sayyed Saab, CEO of Enron, has mashallah spent a lot of time trying to investigate the energy problem. So today I welcome him. He will start with a presentation on the energy problem, and then we'll get our usual panel of people to try and put the pieces together and to tell us if we'll solve energy problem in the next 3 generations or not. So Ahsan Saab, please, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, Nadeem Saab, and assalamu alaikum all the participants, viewers. This is a topic where so much has been written, so much has been said. So I don't want to go into general or generic comments. Power sector, as we all know, is the backbone of any economy, of any nation, and Pakistan is no different. और थोड़ा सा स्क्रीन मेरा इधर उधर हो रहा है एक्चुअली, जस्ट 1 सेकंड।
सर कैन आई शेयर योर स्लाइड्स?
नहीं अभी स्लाइड नहीं, मैं जस्ट वांट टू, लेकिन आपने जो स्क्रीन सारे व्यूज खोल दिए हैं, इसको जरा कंसाइज करें इसको, ठीक है? इसको जरा आप मिनिमाइज, 1 सेकंड लेट मी, ताकि हम जरा इसको, जी ठीक है। अच्छा जी, थैंक यू नदीम साहब, सॉरी फॉर द डिले। तो जी पावर सेक्टर हम सबको पता है कि हमारा मुल्क भी इससे डिफरेंट नहीं है, डायनेमिक्स हमारी स्लाइटली डिफरेंट है, लेकिन इम्पोर्टेंस है हमें। पॉपुलेशन भी हमारी बहुत यंग है, बल्जिंग पॉपुलेशन है, तो एम्प्लॉयमेंट का भी इशू है, इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन का भी इशू है, इम्पोर्ट ऑफ बैलेंस भी है, सब जितने लोग हैं एवरीबडी इज़ नॉलेजेबल। सो अब देखना ये है कि इस मौजू को आज डिस्कस करने के लिए हम स्ट्रक्चर क्या दें ताकि बिल्कुल ही मीनिंगफुल डिस्कशन हो सके। एंड व्हाट आई थॉट वाज कि मैं अपनी बात इस तरह शुरू करूं कि रादर देन फोकसिंग ऑन व्हाट द इश्यूज हैव बीन इन द पास्ट, ट्राइंग टू फोकस इन द फ्यूचर। अब फ्यूचर पे बात करने के लिए द बेस्ट थिंग इज टू फर्स्ट सेट द विजन, एंड देन वंस वी सेट द विजन, then in my opinion we see where we stand today and how we can reach to that vision, what we can do in the short term, medium term and long term to reach to that vision. That's what I feel. मैंने सोचा थोड़ी देर पहले कि मैं किस तरह बात करूं, तो I try to structure my thoughts. विजन हमारा इस वक्त ये है कि हम अपने पावर सेक्टर को दूसरी जो डेवलपिंग इमर्जिंग इकोनॉमीज में काम हो रहा है उस तरह लेके चलें। एंड from current situation we take it to comparative market framework, जिसको गवर्नमेंट CTB CM की बात कर रही है, कोई होलसेल मार्केट की बात कर रहा है, लेकिन कंपैरेटिव मार्केट स्ट्रक्चर पे चलें, रिफॉर्म स्ट्रक्चर की तरफ चलें, फ्रॉम सेलर्स मार्केट टू बायर्स मार्केट आ जाएं। हम इलेक्ट्रिसिटी पावर को कमोडिटी की तरह फ्यूचर में मैनेज करने की कोशिश करें, और वो तमाम रिस्क जो गवर्नमेंट ले रही है और जितना एक्सटेंसिवली गवर्नमेंट इन्वॉल्व है, वो रिस्क सारे जो हैं वो इन्वेस्टर्स की तरफ आ जाएं, और प्लानिंग जो है वो सेंट्रलाइज प्लानिंग, गवर्नमेंट प्लानिंग के बजाय एक मार्केट ओरिएंटेड प्लानिंग हो जहां मार्केट एडजस्ट इटसेल्फ। सो दिस इज द विजन वेयर वी वांट टू रीच अल्टीमेटली। नाउ हाउ टू रीच देयर, ये इश्यूज पे आ जाते हैं। जो इश्यूज हैं करंटली वो क्या है? सो बिल्कुल सिंप्लीफाई कर दें तो इशू इज अफोर्डेबिलिटी एंड द इशू इज रिलायबल पावर। रिलायबल एंड अफोर्डेबल पावर इज द इशू। अब रिलायबल एंड अफोर्डेबल पावर, इफ दैट इज द इशू, देन वी वुड सी कि हम यहाँ पे कैसे पहुँच सकते हैं? द इशू इज के बिजली महंगी है, इट्स कॉस्ट इज हाई, एंड क्वाइट अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल इज सेइंग कि बिजली महंगी है क्योंकि डिमांड कम है, सो आपका डिनोमिनेटर बड़ा नहीं हो रहा, और इट्स चिकन एंड एग, या इट्स द अदर वे राउंड कि जी डिमांड क्योंकि नहीं बढ़ पाई फॉर वेरियस रीजंस तो बिजली महंगी हो गई. So whether it's cost and demand or demand and cost, whatever it is, we need to look into both these issues simultaneously and see what we can do right now. Short term में हम इन पे क्या कर सकते हैं? So if we focus on these two issues, the affordability and the reliability, and we look at the short term, so what are the steps? In my opinion, the steps are related to the fuel side. The steps are related to capacity side and the overheads. फ्यूल साइड को हम देखें, बिकॉज पावर का टैरिफ ईपीपी, सीपीपी एंड ओवरहेड से मिलके बनता है सारा ओवरऑल. सो अगर हम ओवरऑल देखें तो फ्यूल साइड पे in the past so many years we have made positive progress. So various previous governments जो उन्होंने पॉलिसीज बनाई, किसी भी गवर्नमेंट ने कोई भी पॉलिसी बनाई हो, we have moved from most expensive fuels to cheaper fuels. हम ग्रेजुअली उसकी तरफ आए और डायरेक्शनली ठीक जा रहे हैं. इस पे अगर हम इंडिजनाइजेशन और कर दें तो एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी भी मिल सकती है पाकिस्तान को इंडिजिनस फ्यूल से, एंड इन द लॉन्ग टर्म एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी भी मिल सकती है सारा ओवरऑल. सो हम फ्यूल पे राइट डायरेक्शन में हैं. When we talk about capacity payments, this is an issue, and we can talk about the changing the debt tenure, changing about the spread, the ROEs. इन सब पे काम भी हो रहा है आजकल और इन चीज़ों पे बात की भी जा सकती है. And then lastly, the overheads. जो overheads हैं, like disco inefficiencies, like so many inefficiencies and T&D losses and all, इन सब पे बात की जाए तो ये शॉर्ट टर्म में काम किया जा सकता है. शॉर्ट टर्म में और भी काम किए जा सकते हैं डिमांड साइड पे, और डिमांड साइड पे जो काम किए जा सकते हैं उसमें आप गैसेस को डाइवर्ट वगैरह भी रॉ गैस को डाइवर्ट कर सकते हैं और उसकी जगह एलएनजी पावर प्लांट्स को दे सकते हैं और उससे भी काम किया जा सकता है. तो वी नीड टू focus our attention on the short-term measures before we move to the medium term, which is more related to reliability. So अगर हम बात इस किस्म की करने लगे कि जी डिमांड तो ऐसे बढ़ेगी कि हम इंडस्ट्री को ले आएँ और इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर लगा लें, या हम कैप्टिव को ग्रिड पे लेके आ जाएं, ये सब मीडियम टर्म में हो सकता है. इस वक्त तो हमें ये देखना है कि अगर हम अपनी कॉस्ट को इस तरह अरेस्ट करें कि उससे हम इंसेंटिवाइज करें. फॉर एग्जांपल मैं एक बात बताऊं, हमें आज की डिस्कशन में, क्योंकि इतने एक्सपर्ट्स माशाल्लाह यहाँ इस डिस्कशन में कम से कम मुझसे तो बहुत ज़्यादा जानते हैं आप सब लोग, अख्तर अली साहब जैसे लोग हैं और राशिद अजीज साहब जैसे लोग हैं, कि अगर हम इंडस्ट्री को जो मार्जिनल कॉस्ट है उसके ऊपर इंसेंटिवाइज करने की कोशिश करें. जो इंडस्ट्री एक्सपैंड होना चाहती है, बढ़ना चाहती है, ऑलरेडी हाई कॉस्ट पे कर रही है, और अगर आपकी आइडल कैपेसिटी पड़ी है और मार्जिनल कॉस्ट पे उसको इंसेंटिवाइज किए, तो ये शॉर्ट टर्म चीज़ें जो की जा सकती हैं. ये सारी ऑल ऑफ दिस वी थॉट अबाउट, एंड देन वी एम्बार्क्ड अपॉन एन स्टडी 7 months ago or something like that. And what we did was we said कि जी rather than we have discussion all over the place, we should focus on the entire value chain of power, and the value chain starts from fuel all the way to demand. तो ज़रा मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूँगा मंसूर साहब से, शायद मंसूर साहब हैं जिनके पास कंट्रोल है प्रेजेंटेशन का. मंसूर साहब, इफ़ यू कैन काइंडली जस्ट पुट द फर्स्ट स्लाइड. I just want to talk about first slide and then I'll move. The first slide of fixing power sector study. Yeah, next one. This is just the title slide. Can you please, yeah, this one. So अगर हम इस slide को देखें, so there are 5 imminent challenges in Pakistan's power sector, and these 5 challenges are.
So you can see your first slide.
जी, I can see it, and I'll tell you when to press. I'll tell you when to press the button for animation. So these are the 5 imminent challenges in power sector. It's circular.
Essence of currently unmute yourself, sir.
अच्छा, ये मैं म्यूट कब आपने कर दिया था?
वो नहीं हो जाता है कभी कभी बटन से, डोंट वरी, जस्ट प्रोसीड.
Okay, all right. Okay. So there are 5 imminent challenges in the power sector, and these are circular debt, excess capacity, low demand, high cost, and foreign exchange drain. हमने जी नहीं मैंने अनम्यूट कर दिया.
जी सर,
So-
ओके सर, कंटिन्यू सर.
जी. So we have put these 5 imminent problems across the entire value chain. Or zara, if you focus on the left hand side of the slide, where it says power value chain, you will see fuel, generation, transmission, distribution, and all the 7 components of the value chain are mentioned. And we figured out that the problem which ranks the highest in the list of the challenge is the circular debt, which is coming from the distribution side. And that relates to 4 various problems, and one of them is DISCO inefficiency. So circular debt ko agar hum dekh lein, circular debt is 42% of your annual FBR tax revenue and growing at a 12% rate, of tax revenue per annum. इसके अंदर 4 components हैं जो circular debt around 500 billion rupees per year के हिसाब से ये rise हो रही है. And out of this 500 billion rupees, more or less on an yearly basis, इसमें कोई 171 billion is related to DISCO inefficiency. Or within DISCO inefficiency, 87% of DISCO inefficiency is coming from 4 DISCOs, which is Casco, Quetta Ki, PESCO, Peshawar, and 2 DISCOs in the province of Sindh, HASCO and SEPCO. ये 4 जो DISCOs हैं, which constitute 87% of DISCO inefficiencies, in my opinion, rather than focusing on every DISCO or every other problem in DISCOs, we should focus on big items जो 80-20 का रूल अप्लाई करके इन 4 पे फोकस करना चाहिए. और ये जो डिस्को की इनएफिशिएंसी की मैं 4 की बात कर रहा हूँ, इसमें आपके पास परमानेंट डिफॉल्टर्स हैं 100 बिलियन रुपीस के. एंड परमानेंट डिफॉल्टर्स आर द डिफॉल्टर्स जिनकी किसी की बेचारे का इंतकाल हो चुका है या वो कंपनी जो ब्लैकलिस्ट वो आउट ऑफ बिजनेस हो चुकी हैं, चाहे इसको बैड डेट डिक्लेयर कर दें और ख़त्म करें इसको. And running defaulters are to the tune of 400 billion plus, and they are increasing at a rate of 80 to 90 billion per year. Or ye running defaulters are coming from, tube wells in Balochistan or, aapke industry in KPK and ye sara kuch. तो इसमें ये एक डिस्को इनएफिशिएंसी है जिसको हमें इन 4 को फोकस करना चाहिए. एंड आपके looking forward in this, what is the solution for this? I think public-private partnership, थोड़ी province की involvement हो, capacity building हो उन discos की, जहाँ पे law and order enforce करके recovery बेहतर बनाई जा सकती है और management of disco improve की जा सकती है by bringing professional management और उसके साथ काम किया जा सकता है. इसी में circular debt में ही दूसरा problem जो है वो relate करता है आपका जो टैरिफ में टाइमिंग डिफरेंस आ जाता है बिटवीन अप्रूवल एंड टैरिफ नोटिफिकेशन में. दैट कंट्रीब्यूट्स अराउंड 119 बिलियन वो है. देन सब्सिडी है एंड देन एक्सपेंसिव लोन्स हैं. उसके बाद इफ यू फोकस इन द सेम चार्ट, द रेड चार्ट, द सेकंड बिग इशू इज इन द जनरेशन साइड व्हिच टॉक्स अबाउट एक्सेस कैपेसिटी. एंड we have considered a very bullish approach as far as demand is concerned. So we have taken 4.5% GDP on an average CAGR पे. और we have taken a very conservative approach on addition of power generation. हमने case to case देखा है कि कौन से plants बंद हो जाएंगे अगले 1 साल में, 5 साल तक plants terminate हो जाएंगे, बंद कर दिए जाएंगे. और ये भी देखा है कि वो कौन सी reliable parties हैं जो plants पुट अप कर देंगी. हमने सारी लिस्ट नहीं उठाई है बल्कि बहुत कंजर्वेटिव अप्रोच ली है कि कम से कम प्लांट कौन से यकीनी है जो ऐड हो जाएंगे. एंड टेकिंग दिस अप्रोच वी केम टू दिस नंबर दैट विद 4.5% जीडीपी अप्रोच by the end of 2025 तकरीबन 3,500 मेगावाट would be surplus. और अगर ये GDP से कम हुआ तो फिर तो ये 2025 से 2026 और 27 तक जा सकता है मामला. सो इससे पता ये चलता है, दो बातें पता चलती हैं इस पॉइंट नंबर 2 एक्सेस कैपेसिटी से, कि गोइंग फॉरवर्ड इंडिपेंडेंट पावर प्लानर की ज़रूरत है. जिस तरह मैंने कहा था अल्टीमेट मार्केट प्लानिंग की ज़रूरत है, लेकिन अभी फौरी तौर पे वी नीड इंडिपेंडेंट पावर प्लानर, नंबर 1. और दूसरी चीज़ हमें ये चाहिए कि जो प्रोजेक्ट्स अभी जिनके फाइनेंशियल क्लोज नहीं हुए या जो प्रोजेक्ट अपनी डेवलपमेंट स्टेज में हैं, उनको कम से कम जब तक डेफर कर दिया जाए या डिले कर दिया जाए, जब तक आपके पास ये क्लैरिटी नहीं आती, यानी आपकी पावर जनरेशन की प्लानिंग इंडस्ट्रियल प्लानिंग से मैच नहीं करती, या आपकी ओवरऑल प्लानिंग जो है वो ठीक नहीं हो जाती, जब तक हमें मज़ीद नए प्लांट ऐड नहीं करने चाहिए और उनको कम से कम रोक लेना चाहिए. दिस इज द सेकंड पॉइंट. The third point is low demand, as I discussed, which is on the bottom. Electricity prices are among the highest in regional benchmarks. We all know कि जो इंडस्ट्री की अगर हम अपने साथ के मुल्कों की प्राइसेस देखें, इंडिया, बांग्लादेश, श्रीलंका, वियतनाम, सारे अपने जैसे अंडर डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज को देखें और अपनी कॉस्ट को देखें, तो हमारी इंडस्ट्रियल प्राइस भी और कॉस्ट रादर इंडस्ट्रियल कॉस्ट भी और हमारे रेसिडेंशियल भी तकरीबन 26 to 28% वी आर हायर देन आवर नेबरिंग कंट्रीज. तो ये इस चीज़ को, और उसकी वजह क्या नज़र आती है? उसकी वजह सिर्फ ये नज़र आती है कि जो प्रीवियसली अगर हम देखें तो पाकिस्तान में ही जो जीडीपी ग्रोथ रही है, पाकिस्तान में जीडीपी ग्रोथ में और जो पावर सेक्टर की ग्रोथ है, इसका मल्टीपल फैक्टर आपस में 1.5 times रहा है. Power sector has always grown, higher than the GDP growth, mostly. At a 1.2 multiple रहा है इसका, कभी 1.3 multiple रहा है. और पिछले 7 साल हम उठा के देख लें, अगर हम 2007 से लेके 7 साल उठा के देखें आगे तक, तो उसमें हम देखते हैं कि पावर सेक्टर हैज़ ऑलवेज लैग्ड बिहाइंड द जीडीपी. तो अगर जीडीपी हमारा जो भी रहा हो 5.3% का क्या अगर रहा हो उस जमाने में, तो पावर सेक्टर कोई 4% पे रहा है. तो पावर सेक्टर इंस्टेड ऑफ लीडिंग इट हैज़ बीन लैगिंग बाय 0.75. और उस वजह से वो जो भी वजूहात थी, आपकी वो डिमांड जो अब 123 टेरावाट पे आप पहुंच जाएं, तो वो 160 होनी चाहिए थी, जो नहीं पहुंच सकी. तो देयरफॉर लो डिमांड has also been an issue. इस पे मैं एक और चीज़ आपको बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग बताऊं जो मैंने यहाँ नहीं लगाई बिकॉज बहुत लंबी प्रेजेंटेशन हो जाती. हमने एक चीज़ और देखी, अगर हमारी डिमांड वो होती जो कि पिछले सालों में ये मल्टीपल फैक्टर रहा जीडीपी का और पावर सेक्टर की ग्रोथ का जो इंटर रिलेशनशिप थी, मल्टीपल फैक्टर था 1.2 1.3 का, अगर ये भी रहती और 160 टेरावाट पे पहुंच जाती, तो आपका जो कैपेसिटी चार्जेस इस वक्त हैं, वो कैपेसिटी चार्जेस मिनिमम 25% कम हो जाते, बिकॉज ऑफ दिस डिनोमिनेटर बेस आपका इंक्रीज हो जाता. तो ये लो डिमांड है जिसको अब डिस्कस करेंगे हम एक्सपर्ट्स के साथ. फोर्थ आइटम इज हाई कॉस्ट. इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कॉस्ट पर यूनिट विल इंक्रीज बाय ₹5.1 with CPP increasing and EPP decreasing. Again, in the study, we studied our cost in cents kilowatt hours basis and also in rupee kilowatt hour basis. And we saw this astonishing comparison कि जब whenever we see it in cents, तो हमें नजर ही आता है कि EPP तो कम हो गया. EPP तो हम एक्सपेंसिव फ्यूल से शिफ्ट कर गए अपने सस्ते फ्यूल्स की तरफ. लेकिन और सीपीपी जो बढ़ना था वो बढ़ भी गया, लेकिन सीपीपी जो बढ़ा हुआ नजर आता है व्हेन यू लुकिंग ओनली एट सेंट्स, तो सीपीपी उतना ही बढ़ा जितना उसे बढ़ना चाहिए था. और आपकी ओवरऑल टैरिफ बिटवीन 2018 एंड 2025 अगर 18 और 2025 को कंपेयर करें और सेंट्स में देखें, तो नजर आता है कि आपका ओवरऑल टैरिफ कम हो रहा है, तकरीबन 20% के करीब कम हो रहा है. बट व्हेन यू लुक एट द सेम थिंग इन रुपी फॉर्म, तो आप परेशान हो जाते हैं, बिकॉज उसमें आपका टैरिफ ₹5 के करीब बढ़ जाता है 2025 में जाके कंपेयर टू 2018. एंड द रीजन इज कि आपका जो टैरिफ है, उसका जो आउटले है, उसका फॉरेन कंपोनेंट बहुत ज्यादा है, डॉलराइज्ड है. सो आपकी रुपी डिवैल्यूएशन ने काफ़ी इम्पैक्ट किया है. So these are the things, 4 items that I wanted to discuss, and then it's forex drain. US dollar $6 billion was spent on imported fuels. So आपका import balance पे आप देख रहे हैं कि कितना मसला है इस पे. And then if you look at the same slide and look at the gray part, the gray rectangle which says other challenges, then you have grid limitations, limited ability to incorporate renewable power in the grid, and 7th is access and quality. So gentlemen and my friends, this is in one sheet. We have tried to put down various issues across the entire value chain of power.
एक सेकंड ऐसे साहब, मुझे भी किसी का मैसेज है. एक सेकंड, सबको आवाज आ रही है कि नहीं आ रही? मुझे किसी ने मैसेज भेजा, आवाज नहीं शायद आ रही. कैन एवरीबॉडी
आवाज आ रही है सर? जी सर,
सबको आ रही है.
चीमा
साहब कैन यू हियर? चीमा साहब को अनम्यूट करें ना यार. चीमा साहब कैन यू हियर? चीमा साहब अनम्यूट करें प्लीज. कांट हियर यू. चीमा साहब कैन यू अनम्यूट?
आवाज नहीं आ रही है, कैसे पता चलेगा कि आवाज नहीं आ रही उनको?
चीमा साहब आवाज आ रही है आपको?
जी अब आ रही है जी.
बस ठीक है, थैंक यू. सॉरी असद साहब.
नहीं, नो प्रॉब्लम साहब, आई कैन अंडरस्टैंड यू. राइट. सो व्हाट वी हैव डन इज, ये एक जो एक तरह से इलस्ट्रेशन बनाई है. वी आई थिंक ये सारे माशाल्लाह सब एक्सपर्ट्स बैठे हैं, ऑल ऑफ यू आर अवेयर ऑफ ऑल ऑफ दीस थिंग्स. What I have tried to do is to put down these things in an illustration form so that we can capture it, and it's open for feedback, the working that we have done. So to conclude my part, my opening part of this webinar, I must say that yes, we agree the issue is affordability and the issue is reliability of the power, and we need to see how we can work on the demand side as well as on the cost side. Nadeem Saab, these were the
points. Thank you, Asad Saab. Thank you, Hassan Saab. Sorry. Thank you very much. Aapne, mashallah, you laid out the issues very well and summarized it very well for us. I certainly don't claim to be an expert in this. So I'll turn to the panel. We've got a great panel. We've got, mashallah, Shakil Ahmed Durrani, who's been wonderful, one of our best civil servants, former Chairman WAPTA. We've got Akhtar Ali Saab, former member Energy Planning Commission. We've got Rashid Aziz, who's committed every energy mistake in the World Bank. He's led all the energy projects. Mehreen Aziz Khan, who's Chief of Marketing Communication.
Nadeem, can you please look towards the microphone? Your voice is getting...
Okay, sorry. So the point is, now let me turn to the thing. Only one question that I'd like to ask you guys. We think of the power sector as kind of a single macroeconomic thing where it's a single entity. Whereas I look at the power sector, whether it's supply or demand, as a disaggregated set of players. Whether it's DISCOs, IPPs, or whoever, there are a disaggregated set of players who somehow are forced to become aggregated because they are run by the secretary. So the problem lies with the secretary or who? I mean, we need to really come out in the open. Why can't DISCO CEOs, we've had a webinar with them, why can't they run that themselves? Why can't disaggregate the system, decentralize the system as elsewhere in the world? So Mehreen Sahiba has to go first, so let me take her on first, then I'll come to the next. Mehreen Sahiba, your views on everything that has been said so far and whatever you like.
Thank you so much to all the participants and to Nadeem Saab for giving me this opportunity. So basically, I'd like to start, if I may, with just an overview, and I'll build upon the points made by Zafar Saab. I agree with many of the points that he's so carefully set out about the state of the power sector. So if we start first with the circular debt issue. So I'm very pleased to be able to say that K Electric does not contribute to circular debt since its privatization. I agree with him that this is probably the biggest deterrent to any resolution of Pakistan's power crisis. It's not just an accounting issue, and this is how previous governments have been looking at this so far. They haven't really gone to the source of the problem, and they've come up with this very temporary fix of bailing out these discos. So they just pass on the financial cost to consumers as a separate charge. The current surcharge per unit is about 0.5 pesos. And incidentally, that's only served to compound the problem. It's increased our country's debt burden. And essentially, the worst part of this is that it actually discourages any efforts to become more efficient or to achieve operational improvements. Now, that's, I think, the critical point on circular debt. Now, in terms of excess power supply, we do have excess power supply right now. That's because generation companies have been favored over discos. At the moment, estimates are that there's about 7,000 megawatts surplus production capacity in the system right now. And some estimates are going to predict that that will be about 12,000 megawatts surplus in 2025. And what concerns me is that the current regulatory framework actually incentivizes investments in generation plants, but it does not incentivize investment in transmission and distribution networks. So even good discos with exceptional AT&C losses also report losses due to tariff shortcomings. So that's something that we have to look at. Now, I won't touch on the lower demand for power because I think Zafar Saab has looked at that quite in detail. But let me go on to the high cost of power, which he also mentioned. Pakistan produces the most expensive power in this region. The cost of power production is, 26% higher than our neighbors, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Bangladesh, South Korea, Thailand, Vietnam, you name it. I think it's logged off. Logged off. Why did that happen?
It's a system thing. Just keep touching the mouse.
Sorry, apologies. We have an automatic log-off system for our security. So basically, as I was saying, we have some of the most expensive power in the region, and almost 26% higher, 28% higher for residential consumers. And even though nationally we've added about 10 to 12,000 megawatts of production capacity in recent years, and it's estimated we will double that, so another 10 to 12,000 in the pipeline, capacity payments to the standby plants remains a major cause of producing expensive power. So we have to look at that. We have to look at that arrangement. And the capacity payments are expected to soar to almost rupees 4 trillion in 2025. And again, the previous speaker talked about this. We need to have an integrated planning policy in the sector. It's been haphazard, it's been ad hoc. Each government comes in and does what is expedient, and we have to have proper planning in this energy sector. I'm not going to go into the IPPs. I think there are many more qualified people who can speak on that. However, what I would say is that with K Electric's experience, we would like to see regulatory certainty, consistent, long-term, stable frameworks that allow private sector investment in this sector, and which allow us to plan properly, so that you don't have the kind of experiences that we've had, where we've put forward plans and we've been stuck for 2 or 3 years without getting tariffs notified, without being able to implement those, and then those policies change. So I think that is something that I would like to see, and very much hear the other panelists' views on as well, that how do we actually achieve that? Because I feel that that's the only way we're going to have a reduction in electricity prices for consumers. That's the only way we're going to increase the quality of service and have fair competition. Because nobody's against competition, but what you want is fair competition. You've got to have the rules of the game set out. And I think where we have to be very careful, and K Electric's made these views known recently in various hearings, is that for somewhere like Karachi, we have a very diverse economic segmentation in the city. So we have extremely poor areas, which we service, and we have very well-off areas, which we also service. And at the moment, the model is that there's a cross-subsidization. So it allows us to invest in those what we call high-loss areas, where people don't actually pay their bills, and there's a high degree of theft. And we cross-subsidize them from the more affluent areas where people do pay. Now, if you go into a competitive environment, what the government or the regulator has to do is they have to actually ensure that any competitor that comes in also services those high loss areas, so those poorer areas, because what you don't want is cherry picking. Compared to developed countries, we have to be very aware that we have vulnerable populations, and we want to ensure that investment in the infrastructure also takes place in those areas where people cannot afford to pay their bills and they are more vulnerable. So I think that's something that we're very concerned about, that if we do go into a fully competitive market, that is taken care of. And although we all aim for competition, the fact is that this is a public good. People cannot survive without electricity. So how do you provide this service to people who can't afford it? You don't want them to be priced out of the market, and the market doesn't always correct itself quickly enough. So I think that is something that we have to look at very carefully. And maybe we go towards a mixed model like Mumbai, where the poorer areas are serviced by the government and the richer areas are opened up to competition. Or we look at Turkey, and we can go into various discussions on that. But I think the point is that we have to be very careful. We can't go headlong into sort of free and open market competition without looking at the dynamics of most cities in Pakistan. And certainly I can speak for Karachi, that we have a very clear vulnerable population. We have a lot of illegally occupied land. We have enormous challenges with encroachment and theft and issues like that, which really have to be addressed before you just open the market up. So let me just go on now to the fuel issue. I do agree. We are over-reliant on imported fuels. And I believe almost 50% of the fuels that we're using right now are imported. Clearly, that needs to change. It's a massive drain on our national exchequer of about, I believe, $5.5 billion a year. I know the government is working on renewable energy. They want to increase that. They want us to go perhaps towards local coal to improve the mix. However, as we all know, globally, countries are moving away from fossil fuels. And I think that's something the government has to address in terms of its environmental commitments. However, we should actually, I believe, perhaps be incentivizing local solar panel equipment manufacture. And K Electric has been one of the leading proponents of allowing net metering and encouraging people to install solar solutions. So I do think that we should be looking at local manufacturing of that type of equipment. Now, I've alluded to theft, and let me just come to that, because across Pakistan, recoveries do remain low. I mean, K Electric has done very well, and we have been acknowledged in the various reports by NEPRA. So, I mean, let me just give you some figures. Since 2009, K Electric's T&D losses have reduced by 16.8%. So we were at 35.9% in 2009. Now we're at 19.1%. Whereas the T&D losses of other discos have actually increased by 1 percentage point. During 2009 to 2019, KE's AT&C losses have improved by 18.1% percentage points. And that is almost an annual impact of about 60 billion rupees. In that same period, other discos managed to improve their AT&C losses by only 2.1 percentage points. KE has made a lot of significant investments across the value chain. We've outperformed other discos in terms of our operational improvements. Since 2015, KE's consumer base has increased now by 30% from 2.158 million customers to 2.81 million consumers today. Other discos, their consumer base has only increased by 21%. So, that's quite a significant margin. Since 2015, KE's distribution capacity base has increased by about 30.9 percentage points, from 6,048 MVA to 7,916 MVA, while other discos, their consumer base has increased by, their capacity base has increased by 12.9%. So this improved performance, and these are metrics which have been acknowledged in NEPRA's State of Industry Report 2018, and I can go into more details if people are interested in that. But these are acknowledged facts and figures. So I'll just end by giving you the conclusion that NEPRA had written in that 2018 State of Industry Report. They said, subsequent to privatization from 2009 to 2018, KE Electric has shown improved operational performance in its transmission and distribution sectors, whereas other discos have shown deterioration or barely maintained their performance levels over the same period. So I think what that demonstrates is that post-privatization experience of KE Electric sets a good precedent, or certainly a good learning, for the future privatization of discos within Pakistan. My last point is, however, what we do need to improve is regulatory certainty. And that is critical for investor confidence. And it's also critical for the planning that Zafar Saab was referring to, because if the government is to plan properly for the energy sector, the regulator has to play a role in that, which supports it. And we have had many regulatory and bureaucratic hurdles. We've talked about this openly, with all due respect to our regulator and the government. Certain processes have been very slow. I'm talking about the previous government now. In 2016, for example, we submitted a tariff proposal, and that tariff was not awarded until July 2018 and wasn't notified until 2019. So, into how can you plan to fight? And the revised tariff then becomes a drastic departure from the previous tariff, and it puts the sustainability of the whole company at risk. You end up borrowing, which we have, in order to finance for those delays. And now we've got the necessary tariffs. We are investing in our 900 megawatt plant, which inshallah, the first unit of that should be coming online by May 2019. So that's one thing. It also has an impact on Karachi and Pakistan as an investment destination, because foreign investors look to certainty. And, if we are going to be the investment destination of choice as a country, then we do need to provide that certainty to the foreign investor. Similarly, with inconsistent policies. So a few years ago, KE Electric, for example, was told around about 2013, 2014, that we were not going to receive any power from the national grid. And now that's changed. Now we're being told, no, we'll actually able to give you more power from the national grid. And that impacted our 700 megawatt coal-fired power plant. And again, this was, something which went on for years. And it takes a lot to actually plan for a power plant. You spend money, you do soil studies, NESPAC is involved. So many organizations are involved. It's not an easy thing to do. So it's a huge waste of resources to then have these decisions come back. And again, this is something that we have to look at because we have changes in administration and they impact policy. And so we have to have some sort of a long-term plan. Now, with Karachi, one of the major factors that we face is there are just too many civic bodies involved. For a disco in Karachi, operating in Karachi, and for any company that comes in and attempts to distribute power in Karachi, you've got to deal with about 20 civic agencies. You know, they have overlapping responsibilities, and you know, we witnessed during the rain with the flooding in Karachi. I mean, that's just, nobody was taking responsibility. So it's very difficult for a distribution network to survive with that kind of ambiguity. And under the current regulatory framework, what we feel very strongly is that IPPs are given preference over discos, and they are provided with the long-term stable tariff with very low risk, which has resulted in less investment in transmission and distribution networks, as comparable return on equity is higher for GenCos. That has to be addressed. And having excess power, fine, that's great, but there's no point if you can't deliver that power efficiently. So you have to address the disincentivization for investment in transmission and distribution. Now, K Electric, I think, is, as I've said, it's a very good case study for privatization. I think we've done some things really well. I think there are a lot of learnings for future investors from K Electric's experience, because we have been able to highlight the challenges that we've faced. And I think really, and I'm happy to answer questions further on this, but I'll end that way with just saying that what is the possible way forward? I think if we see more improvements in the regulatory framework, if we see more certainty in national policy, energy policy planning, and I think if we see a better balance between the incentivization for generation companies and those which are involved in transmission and distribution, then I think that is something that will definitely help us. Thank you very much indeed.
Nadeem Saab, आप mute हैं. Nadeem, you are muted.
Done, coming. Thank you, Mehreen Bibi, thank you very much. You made some very good points. I will come to Shakil Durrani Saab. You've been in, as I said, the civil service for a long time. You know a lot of this stuff. The way I look at it purely as an economist, in order for me to study any market, I have to see market players, and I don't see any market players. In order for me to study any market or sector, I have to see where the regulation is, where the policy is, where the implementers are, and I don't see any difference. So, Shakil Sahab, have we even constructed a system, or are we just doing, you know, this counting of numbers back and forth and saying, hey, demand is so much, supply is so much, when we really do not have a well-configured energy sector? We have a joke that we've been sitting on for the last so many years, and we continue to make it. And we'll come to Rashid Aziz after this, because the World Bank made this mess. So Shakil Sahab, can you please start?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, sir. Let me start with a caveat. You know, I am not an expert on the subject. I was chairman of WAPTA for 60 months, which is 5 years. And only for 1 month was I the chairman of both the power and the water sectors, because then WAPTA was bifurcated. And for the remaining 59 months, I was just chairman of the water part of it. But I had a lot of private interest, especially with my friend Tahir Bashar Chima Sahab over there. Him and me would always, me in my private capacity, so to speak, we would discuss these issues. So in the presence of such experts, I would be just try and keep the volume low. But let me say, there are 3 issues which I'd like to discuss. And in this context, you know, since we are discussing the fixing of the power sector in Pakistan, I think there are three strategic issues and the others are tactical issues. What has been discussed or is being discussed repeatedly and even today, they're very important issues by Ahsan Saab and by Nadeem Saiba, but they are the tactical issues. We need to focus on the fundamental, on the strategic issues. 100 tactical victories in war do not equal one major strategic victory. So the three issues that I'm going to raise, and I have to go back, is the unbundling of WAPTA, which is the right thing to do. If the World Bank suggested that, congratulations to the World Bank. But it had to be done because when WAPDA was created in 1958, there were less than 500,000 consumers. By 2007, there were 19 million consumers. And you just had to separate the distribution from the rest. Unfortunately, the unbundling of WAPDA was marked by lots of follies. It's a very, very sad tale of follies, deception, some corruption, and gross incompetence. And at the time, it was being split very cleverly. The then leadership in PEPCO, with the help of the Ministry of Water and Power, decided to take over other areas which were not meant for bifurcation. Only the distribution was to be separated, not the thermal power generation, not the NTDC. And the result was that all the checks and control which the old WAPDA had over these issues, with one stroke, they were eliminated. And now the new PEPCO, headed by the Secretary of Water and Power, a great friend of mine, but I think they did a poor job, by a minister who just reveled in this new PEPCO because they suddenly had access to so much power and patronage. They got 120,000 people under their belt. They got command of almost 4 army corps. They had limitless powers and patronage, and they were not willing to let that go. And that is the cause for the problem. Now, what the government, and this is a strategic decision, must do is what it had planned to do and it committed to do. And that was that within 3 years, PEPCO should have been disbanded to the extent that the discos had to be privatized. And since the example of K Electric was not very healthy, a better system of privatization should have been undertaken or should be undertaken now. And better still, rather than privatization, a disco, it would be best to lease out a disco for 15 years, 20 years, or to lease out some of the feeders. There was an experiment undertaken some time back. They leased out a feeder, and I think there are 8,000 plus feeders. They could lease out a set of feeders, and whoever gets it on lease must commit to providing, let's say, an extra 10 or 20% of the revenues. And that could be done easily. And, you know, the assets of the organization, of the entity, of the discos would not be at the disposal of the new owners, as in the K Electric. The ownership of the assets would remain with the state, but the leasing should be done. And as I said, that some of these awful discos, the Peshawar disco, the Quetta, Hyderabad, whatever, they really need to be leased out rather than focusing on Islamabad and Faisalabad and Gujranwala, which are excellent discos, I think, and where the losses are under 10%. Why are you focusing on that? Why are you remaking that mistake? The government of Pakistan committed a blunder in the 90s by selling off the Kot Addu power plant, brand new German equipment, and they sold it out. Why didn't they sell out the Muzaffarabad thermal power station, which had third-class equipment from ex-communist countries and which was doing very poorly? But rather than selling off the bad one, they chose to sell out the big one. And the Kot Addu power station, within 2.5 years, they recovered all their investments. So let us not make those mistakes, and the government must seriously consider leasing out either the discos themselves or the many feeders in these discos. So that is one decision that they have to take. But as I said again, you know, PEPCO is now becoming a permanent organization, which it was not supposed to be. And since PEPCO did not have, and Tahir Bashara Chima Saab knows it very well, as long as you have the central contract cell in WAPDA, it's virtually impossible to do anything improper. And yet, for no fault of lots of these people, the workforce in PEPCO in WAPDA was really top class. I think I had a lot of, both on the water side, on the grid side, and on the distribution side, some very, very fine people. But once you handed over PEPCO to the Ministry of Water and Power and to the secretary who had no time for this thing, he was the chairman and he just didn't have the time. And I knew 5 secretaries who were dealing with this issue. And believe me, not one of them really understood what the issues were. Not one of them. And the ministers, of course, understood nothing. So I think that is what you need to do. How do you do it? I think you need a holding company. You need a holding company of PEPCO in which all the discos will be represented, but keep the secretary and the minister of power out of it. Get professionals, get some professional as a chairman and get some professional as a CEO, and let them run the discos the way a professional organization does. This business of having board of directors in various discos was a disaster. I have seen these directors operate. They were always more concerned about getting a car and putting a hand in the till and trying to get involved in the procurement issues, in the recruitment issues. And a Nazim or a MPA, he's just not suitable for something like that. Just get professional and get them to do it. Now, you know, if you have to reform things, then reform them. And reform them the way it was supposed to be reformed. The Area Electricity Board, as Chima Saab would agree with me, were doing a fairly reasonable job with very few staff. And they were focused completely on the recoveries and on the provision of power. And their losses were much less than the losses today. But we had to reform them. We ended up deforming the system, which should not have been there. And incidentally, and here, let me say that 2 MDs of PEPCO, and Tahir Bashara Chima Saab is not one of them, 2 MDs of PEPCO and 4 CEOs of discos told me something which is at odds with what the government for the past 15 years has been propagating. What are the actual losses, the technical losses and the administrative losses, which is pilferage and theft? You know how much that is? They say it's about 17.5, it might be 18% now. Every CEO of Disco and these 2 MDs have told me that the losses are around 25%. Let's get clear at least on what the losses are. And there's a very clever way of showing reduced losses, high billing. Recoveries, they say they rose to 96%. Well, they used to be 86%. I can agree with some that it might have been increased slightly, but 86, 87% is the recovery. But to say that they have been recovering this, so let's get the figures right, or let the government and the Prime Minister must be given the right figures. The cabinet must be provided with the right figures. So I've already said that you have to go the whole hog, the way it was decided when you bifurcated WAPDA. PEPCO should have gone, and the thermal generation should have remained with WAPDA. The grid, the NTDC should have been with WAPDA, and just the distribution companies should have been with PEPCO, and PEPCO had a sunset clause. Since I'm only talking of the strategic issues, my last issue is the energy mix. You know, this country can never afford a system where 60% or 61% of power generated is thermal power, and that is imported, most of it. this is just not viable. And hydropower is, I think, about 29 or 30%. It should be switched. Hydro should be 60, and everything else should be less. But there's such a great demand for IPPs, because IPPs, this is the proverbial land of gold. You know, anyone who has an IPP can, for the next 10 generations, live with great opulence. And opulence is what they are living with. So IPPs, remember, in 1994, they wanted to induct 2,000 megawatts of IPP power. And they ended up today with, I think, something like 14,000 or something, because this is just, it was a one-sided contract, which no one cared to alter in the years later. But we need to go back to the fix. Even I'm glad the government has started work on the Moman Dam and the Amir Basha Dam. But this is what needs to be done. Focus on water, focus on other renewables. So energy mix is really important, and leasing out or privatizing is one other area which the government must do immediately. And the first point, you know, just get this PEPCO out of the ministry's grasp, have a holding company, have someone really respectable, you know, who knows the subject. And I, of course, don't know the subject, so I'm not a candidate at all. But they are good people, good engineers who could be the chairperson, and very good CEOs from the private sector and from the public sector. Public sector has fascinating, fabulous people in PEPCO WAPDA for this thing. Thank you, sir. Can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Nadeem.
Thank you, Shakil Saab. Thank you very much. You've been very insightful as usual. You made a number of points which Rashid Saab, a former member of the World Bank, can now respond to. Rashid Saab, will your organization take responsibility and come forth and do something? I keep hearing ADB and the World Bank are funding the power sector, but we continue with the same mess. In fact, we've lost more money than the ADB and the World Bank have ever given us. So how do we fix this sector? Talk like a Pakistani and tell us. And, you know, no matter what you did for the World Bank, that's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nadeem. Yes, that is a perfect point or statement for me to enter, because I can forget about everything in the past. Everybody knows I'm responsible for it, and nothing needs to be done about it because I take responsibility.
Rashid Saab, you are one of us, so don't worry, we take liberties with you for that reason.
No, I am going to stay with this thing. I'm responsible for all that happened, and that's now history. Whoever wants to change history has better build a time machine. Otherwise, they better live with what I have created. But anyway, okay, now the problem I have with whatever I've heard up to now is it's not talking about fixes. Almost all of what I have heard up to now is, oh, the past. I had a problem with this thing. Somebody didn't listen to me. They didn't give me the cheap power, cheap gas, so I couldn't generate. The demand for electricity is not going. I don't really think we should be giving too much significance to that. Recognize today's situation, yes, but then come up with suggestions on the future. I'm going to focus almost entirely on that. And in that, I'll take from Zafar Saab's first slide, circular debt or the arrears of the power sector to all over the place. That's one of the major concerns right now. We should find a way to undo that situation gradually or immediately. We should find a way to generate resources from somewhere. It may be manna from heaven. We can pretend to be, praying to, and the Almighty will drop whatever on us. Or we can be practical and say the arrears problem has accumulated to X trillion today because the revenues and resources going into the sector were insufficient to cover the costs of the sector. And as a result, every year there was some arrears. We need to get to a situation where the revenues and resources going into the sector are higher than the quote unquote prudently incurred costs. There's a role for NEPRA in determining that. Whatever is prudently incurred, revenues and resources should be higher. If you're not ready to accept that point, that sort of surplus is required for offsetting or paying off some of the past arrears and maybe chipping away or maybe in one go eliminating the circular debt, then I suggest we don't call circular debt a problem. We just say it is what we made it out to be because we were not willing to pay the full cost of electricity. So on the one hand, there is a need to ensure that tariffs and other whatever grants and aid, consumer contribution, this, that, and the other, not just tariffs, but plenty of ways of bringing resources into the sector are more than enough to cover all legitimate costs, including, say, over a 10-year period, 1/10 of the circular debt arrears to be paid off. That's, to my mind, it doesn't require rocket science. It is simple logic. If we are able to develop a consensus on, yes, that is required, you can find a quote unquote financial analyst who will do a discounting and compounding over 10 years and find out solutions of that 1.2 trillion or 2.6 trillion or whatever the number is today, paying it off over 10 years through XYZ sources. That's probably just a simple worksheet, but recognizing that resources going into the sector have to be sufficient to cover all legitimate and prudently incurred costs. And secondly, generate a bit of a surplus through which that those arrears are paid off. That's one suggestion for the future. A consensus building on, yes, revenues and resources have to be high. Consensus building, not the revenues and resources. The second point I want to make, and it appears in the previous three remarks, the sector is not performing according to its levels of efficiency, required levels of efficiency. KESC has, or K Electric has, sorry, the name may be just KE. I don't know what the actual name is, but whatever the actual name of the organization is, has reduced losses from 35+% to 19. The others have not done. They've improved by 2%, etc., whatever. I don't want to question that. That partly is because loss reduction programs may or may not have been funded. If there are loss reduction activities, whether it's just improved systems, whether it's better manpower, whether it's better money, or whether it is those capital investments required to upgrade the lines, if those things have been fully funded, maybe those improvements in the discourse would have been. We need to ensure that on the one hand, and Nadeem, I'm now specifically answering one of your points. It's not create a job or create a project for the World Bank. I'm talking about repair and maintenance. I'm talking about lubricants and washers and fans and dust covers, etc. Operation and maintenance, as well as investment. Those O&Ms are in the WAPDA system, for example.
Who's going to do that? Who's going to do that?
We will have to provide for it. Nobody
will the World Bank come into it?
Why should the World Bank come into it? And why should I be worried about the World Bank? I retired from that place 7 years ago. I have no allegiance to it. I have not done any consulting work for it. If they want to generate products, you let them use their. Why should I answer that they need to and they should or
who's
are?
Going to do the lubricant?
I'm only going to say WAPDA 7, 10, 20 years back, when I used to look at the financial statements, the amount for operation and maintenance was 1.5% of revenues. Ask any IPP or ask even K Electric, what do they have as their contracted and committed and allowed O&M expenditure? I'm sure it'll be 3% or above. They are able to maintain the facility and have it perform according to its designed levels only because they have enough provisions to do the maintenance work. to do the rehabilitation work, etc. If that doesn't, then let's be ready to also recognize that that equipment will perform at subpar levels. Making adequate provisions for that is something then that it's up to us. It's not up to Rashid Aziz, it's not up to this forum, it's up to everybody in Pakistan being able to recognize that there is an O&M and upkeep and expansion requirement. And if those are not funded, something will give. So, okay, that's the second part of it. The third element which I want to challenge everybody who's in this forum. I'm just looking at the energy yearbook of the last 5 years, the table saying net consumption of electricity has grown by 5.6% per annum since 2014 to 2019. Let's remember that was a period of almost 3, 4, 2, and 1% growth or negative growth. That wasn't a period of 7.5% GDP growth. So energy consumption has been, or sorry, electricity consumption. I'm looking at the number for electricity. 5.6% weighted average, annual compound growth rate, 2014 to 2019 of net consumption of electricity. Obviously, the pattern of the elasticity that Asan pointed out, etc., is being observed. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to now throw in a very challenging statement. Does that mean electricity is unaffordable? Does that mean electricity is not being consumed? Or that elasticity maintaining even during periods which were relatively modest and low GDP growth rates is an indication of people can and are willing to pay those expenditures. Let's have a debate about it rather than get carried away with this, catch-all of the poor man is being squeezed and he's dying out, etc. And recognize that net electricity consumption has been growing at 5.6% over a 5-year period when GDP growth rate was probably on average well below that 5%. Total energy use has been growing at 6.5%, 6.7 over the same period. People are unable to, and therefore they're still going to consume or continuing to consume. I'm sorry, that's a challenge I do want to throw to everybody who wants to highlight the unaffordability and tariffs are unaffordable. There is a reality we need to recognize. However, okay, now coming to this final element of moving from here to into the future, from fixed price contracts, from guaranteed returns, guaranteed markets, this, that, and the other, to competitive. Yes, that should be. That is what the policy says. Let's not forget the policy does say so. Let's recognize that there is a policy which says this. And let's recognize that there are laws which say this. I pointed out about 2 sessions back that what is required is for somebody to be preparing the bidding documents for the next phase of induction of IPPs, but it was constantly drowned out, and we've got 3,500 megawatts of committed capacity, which is over and above our, we will get to 12,000, we will get to 15,000. My answer to that is basically, is there a scope for incremental changes at the margin? The 5% additional power we may require in 2035, for example, or 2038 and start bidding for that in 2035, could that be done under competitive modes? And if it could be done in competitive nodes, what is required is not to shake our heads and say, because of the existing surplus, we can't do anything about it. Should be preparing the bidding document. NEPRA should be approving the bidding document, and whoever is the bid issuer, whether it's a DISCO, whether it's a CPPA, or whether it's a XYZ, whoever, they should be preparing to use that bidding document for inviting competitive bids. And anybody who wants to bid on that shouldn't then go back to history and say, oh, by the way, 10 years back, I had a fixed price contract. Why shouldn't I be entitled to a fixed price contract today? 10 years ago, I was given a 100% guaranteed market, or 15 or 25 years back, I did have a guaranteed market and somebody gave it to me. The 94 policy did. I shouldn't be asked to bid and therefore seek my own customers and seek a revenue from a competitive price. No, that should be discouraged by all of us. We unfortunately do not take this firm stance, and therefore the introduction of competition, which could be in the first marginal step. Please remember, I'm saying this thing. The first marginal step could be 3% of additional capacity, 5% of capacity, etc. That 5% or 3% can be competitive, and we better forget about, oh, we already have excess capacity, so there's no point in working towards. Let's move towards that. If we don't, then let's be ready with, yes, the sector is fixed price, guaranteed profit, etc., etc., and we're not willing to change for it. I'll stop at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rashid Saab. I'll come to Akhtar Ali Saab. Rashid Saab, you always defend yourself very well, mashallah. You've got great debating skills. But quite frankly, we are in a mess and I don't know how to clean it up. I think when everybody says that the demand, supply, and all these things, to me as an economist, they're totally meaningless. Demand always clears supply. Supply always clears demand. The only time there's a disequilibrium is when the government interferes. There is no disequilibrium when you tell me growth exceeds supply, whatever. That's only because the government interferes. Otherwise, there should be no problem. Now, Akhtar Ali Saab, can you please clear? You've written a book on this, you're well known, etc. Can you clear up the mess? How do we get the government out of the system? Otherwise, we'll keep going back and forth. Oh, yeah, demand nahi, supply nahi, IPs badao, ye wo. It's a government-created mess. Is the government going to step out? How do we get the government out? Government and, sorry, the World Bank.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we do.
I see. Thank you. Sir, the replacement of the government is market. Throughout the world, market is the solution. In developing countries, it is not the case. In India, it is not the case.
Sorry for interrupting. Yes, we don't even allow the wheat market to take shape. We don't even allow sugar to be traded. So the market hai koi nahi.
That's true. That's true. Let me see. Now, I'll discuss the market issues. Yes, people are skeptical of the market. The reason is, as we are seeing, sugar and atta and others things, there is cartelization, there are so many issues. Yet, what is the solution? I mean, do you put all sugar, do you nationalize all the sugar and flour mills? So the market, whatever, as democracy, as they say, people say about democracy, it is also about the market. That market is the solution, but it cannot be brought about fast and immediately. But there are certain steps which can be taken, and over the next 1 decade, maybe a reasonable component of the market can be brought about. The first step for this would be wheeling. We introduce wheeling first, which would allow some of the electricity come into the open market. The second issue is the second issue, or the fundamental issue, is that we don't have free electricity to be traded. Most of the capacity that we have is under take or pay contracts. So there is no free electricity. If there is a market exchange, where would these take or pay contracts go? So the problem is, how to create this free electricity, or how to convert the existing firm 30 years contracts, take or pay contracts, into a free tradable electricity. One of the solution is to start with a voluntary exchange, an exchange where free electricity, whether it comes out of captive market or some other instruments, is traded, and an element of some of the plants are being retired. These could come into the free market exchange. I have an estimate that about 5 to 7,000 megawatt of electricity can be brought into the market. By the way, the bringing the private sector generation plant is IPP plants into market may be a problem because they are private, and it is very difficult to convert them, and a lot of NAB issues would be involved if such conversions are made. But government plants can be allowed to be traded in the market, because even if they lose, it's government, or if they make more money than they should have, it is still government. So my suggestion would be to allow government plants to be traded in the market exchange that is to be brought about. And then we could allow some portion of the take or pay contracts to be traded in the market. For example, we could allow initially 10 to 20% of the take or pay contracts to come and to be traded in the market. So there are ways through which you can bring a market. These sugar and other things are really not the market. They are being manipulated. The market we are talking about is of a transparent market, a transparent exchange where electricity is traded in a transparent manner. So we shouldn't be that pessimist about the prospects of having or promoting free market. Ultimately, it is the market which is the solution. It is the market which replaces the bureaucracy and government. Now, and the immediate step perhaps that could be taken is to start competitive bidding for the new projects that are coming. NEPRA is still continuing with awarding take or pay contracts. Although they had announced that at least solar, they would take to competitive bidding or competitive bidding or reverse bidding. It has not happened. So competitive bidding is the first step. That is, what is the problem in having bids for the new plants? Zero equity has been it is a known syndrome in Pakistan, that an investor does not have to put any equity at all and finance his equity through overbidding, through increasing the capital cost, for which NEPRA has been a good partner with the IPPs. So we need NEPRA reforms. IPPs, there have been agreement with IPPs on ROE of 12%. NEPRA has been awarding ROE of up to 20%. So there is now an agreement with even IPPs with which there is a firm agreement. They have agreed to 12% ROE. So NEPRA should come round to revise its numbers given by our good friend Rashid Aziz Saab to them. So NEPRA has to be reformed in two ways. NEPRA has to change its numbers, ROE, the cash flow-based tariff, that is you pay 25% more of the average tariff in the initial years. And over 12 years, you have to retire all the debt. So debt period has to be expanded if possible to 20 years. And the cash flow based tariff should go away. It should have a uniform tariff. And part of the problem, the 4 trillion circular debt that is being forecasted, is partly due to this 25% higher tariff in the initial years. So cash flow based tariff has to go away. Then the capacity utilization has to increase, as Hassan Zafar Saab has rightly pointed out. I don't know where from Mr. Rashid Ali Sayyid has brought his numbers. He has brought the numbers from Energy Yearbook, which has 2 years old data. But if you see the last 2 years data, there is a zero growth. Last winter's winter demand was 8,000 megawatt as opposed to 35,000 megawatt installed capacity. And the summer demand is about 22,000 megawatt. He should see the new numbers and a new book and consult the NTDC and other people for new data and new trends. Energy Yearbook is pathetically old. So the issue is how to increase the demand. A well-known principle is decrease the price, decrease the tariff. But it is also a very risky thing. If I am paying a certain amount of money for the electricity and the rates go down, I'll continue consuming the same maybe and would pay less. So it's a risky thing. You have to devise a clever incentive program. For example, the objective should be that the consumption should increase. You should decrease the price, not wholesale or across the table, but decrease the price to certain sectors and at certain times, bring in more numbers, bring in more consumers, and incentivize the industry to consume more. Find new markets where the lower tariff might be able to sell their products. For example, IT industry can be incentivized. It already works at night. IT industries exports could increase if power tariff is decreased. At night time, there is no consumption. From 11 to 6, there is no consumption. Your capacity cost is high. Your contribution to overheads, when fixed costs are high, you can make more money by decreasing the price because you will be increasing the contribution to overheads. So we have to think about thinking some clever ways of inducting new uses of electricity, new users, expansion of the market without losing the existing revenue. So that is the kind of tariff reform that is to be brought in. On the subject of discourse, privatization has been touted as always been the solution, although KE has not been a very good one. By the way, on KE, the solution is on KE that the generation should be taken away from them, transmission should be taken away from them. I am not suggesting confiscation. What I am suggesting is that their generation and transmission assets should be like an independent IPP, and they should be allowed to sell their electricity as an IPP. We cannot allow a situation in a country where in one part there is a surplus, we don't know how to utilize electricity, and in another part of the country, more and more power plants are coming. That's why government has been stalling approval of new power plant capacity by the KE, because in one part of the country there is a surplus and more surplus would be coming in. 75,000 megawatt of power is committed under take or pay contracts. So how can a government which is already suffering from 2 trillion rupees, which is going to 4 trillion, how can a government allow capacity increase in the other part? So government was very right in installing the new capacity. After all, it's one country, isn't it? One country. So government has been right. There is no justification for adding capacity in this country, whether it is in KE or whether it is outside KE. And I'm happy that KE has learned sympathy for the poor, and they want to have the poor being handled by the government, and while they enjoy tariffs coming from the rich. Anyway, so for privatization, we have been trying privatization for the last, how many, 10, 20 years, but nothing has happened except KE. So what to do? My suggestion is that, as perhaps Durrani Saab has said, to lease these discos. I agree with this proposal, and have a retail market. Have a retail market. When you have leased the fixed assets of the discos, there would be power suppliers, and power suppliers would be the generators, and they would be directly selling to retail. So that is one way, without entering into a very complicated privatization process. One can have leasing combined with retail competition, and the electricity being sold by a variety of power sellers, including IPPs and others. So that is on discos. There are. Let me complete, please. Then on discos, on discos. On discos, we have to do some reforms. Last time I was told by CEO Disco that PESCO has an area of 125,000 square kilometers. There's no way an underdeveloped country's management can manage an area of that size. So discos have to be divided to more manageable sizes, more manageable capacities. So that is another solution that I would put forward. Then there are issues of technologies. In case of discos, smart meters are being talked about for a long time, but a very expensive solution has been put in, whereby only a part of HISCO and a part of LESCO would be provided with the smart meters with an investment of $500 million. It has been estimated that it would take minimum 7 years and $7 billion USD to implement smart meters in the way the smart meter project has been designed and is being promoted. There are other cheaper ways of introducing smart meters, that is installing those on distribution transformers, and be through with smart meters project in a matter of 1 to 2 years, maybe 2 years maximum, and with an investment of less than $1 billion. So we have to think about revising this program, which is now being talked about for the last 3-4 years, but due to its expensive nature, it could not be implemented. The other solution and the other factor is that ISCO and LESCO have been chosen, while there was already a program implemented by USAID in PESCO and MEPCO, which are one of the large loss givers.
Akhtar Saab, did we get independence or not?
Independence.
मुझे समझ नहीं आ रही कि यूएस running our electricity sector, तो फिर हम छोड़ दें ना ये दावा कि हम इंडिपेंडेंट हैं, एम्बेसी खोल के बैठे हैं, फिर छोड़ दें, खत्म हो गई बात.
That's true. Yes, you know, still we are not free, and the financing agencies, the IMF, the ADB, Asian Development Bank is trying to push the same medicine over the last 4 to 5 years, which the stakeholders have rejected, which Planning Commission has rejected, others have rejected, and they say, okay, what will happen if you install an expensive solution in half of LESCO and half of ISCO? So, you know, hello.
मैंने कहा खत्म करने जल्दी.
Just sir, जल्दी करते हैं sir. All right, if you for circular debt, you know, ultimately the way it is increasing, there will be two solutions. One is provincialization of the sector. Provincial governments who have no interest in controlling losses, controlling theft. Secondly, apart from provincialization, ultimate provincialization, the circular debt may have to be shared by the provincial governments. Federal government would not have the wherewithal to pay 4 trillion rupees circular debt in a few years' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akhtar Saab. Thank you very much. Folks, there you have it. We muddled through the power sector. Let me also clarify. I don't think we need, when we say the market, it's not always the market is a better solution. China is operating without markets. Many countries are operating without markets. And there is a fundamental theorem from a long time back, Oscar Lange, etc., that put it that a socialist and a market solution can be the same, provided you configure the sector appropriately. For example, what does the market do? Market makes sure that people who make mistakes suffer losses. The best thing that the market does is, if this maker of the mouse is incapable of running his business, he goes out of business. If the maker of wheat goes out of business because he cannot run his business. In the public sector guaranteed system of Pakistan, not China. China is different. UK is different. France has a public sector managed utility system. It is different. Here, nobody is responsible for the losses. Circular debt happens and everybody throws up their hands and say, oh, circular debt, we don't know where it came from. Nobody in the government, either now, today, or last year, has to tell you where the circular debt came from. I asked flippantly from Rashid Aziz Saab, guys, who does the lubrication? Meter man, who does the metering? I had a recent problem. My Bijli ka bill has shot up through the roof. I took off the meter. The bill is still through the roof. So we went to the Bapta house yesterday. They said, pay the bill. So I paid the bill again. Now the point is, who's responsible? They say, we are not responsible. The Ministry of Power is responsible. So I have an option. I can call some influential people like you, people like yourself, and get something done. But the ordinary guy can't do that. There is nobody responsible anywhere. Chima sir, can you clarify the mess? Chima sir, I rely on you to clarify the mess. Can you clarify the mess?
शुक्रिया जी, शुक्रिया, बहुत मेहरबानी. मैं 5-6 बातें करूंगा, थोड़ी सी करेक्शंस भी कर दूं कुछ चीज़ों की. सबसे पहले तो मैं ये बताना चाहूँगा कि मोहतरमा महरीन अजीज़ खान साहिबा ने फरमाया कि इलेक्ट्रिक जो है वो वाहिद इदारा है जिसने कभी भी, जिसे सर्कुलर डेट में कहते हैं, कंट्रीब्यूशन नहीं की. तो अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह बकदरे जुस्सा नहीं बल्कि अपने जुस्से से ज़्यादा इन्होंने कंट्रीब्यूट किया हुआ. इनका जो तरीक़ाकार बड़ा सीधा है, क्योंकि हमें कस्टमर्स जो हैं या सिंध गवर्नमेंट जो है या फेडरल गवर्नमेंट जो है, उनके कस्टमर्स हमें पैसे नहीं देते, तो हम माशाल्लाह एनटीडीसी को भी पे नहीं करेंगे. तो अब 100 अरब के करीब जो है सिर्फ एनटीडीसी का इन्होंने देना है. तो जाहिर है सर्कुलर डेट में ही जा रहा है. इसी तरह अगर गैस वालों से पूछे तो उनके आंसू रुकते ही नहीं हैं. सुई सर्जन जो है उसको लंबा डाल दिया इन्होंने। ये तो पहले बात आ गई। दूसरी बात मैं ये बताना चाह रहा था कि एक मिसनॉमर है कि सरप्लस कैपेसिटी है। थोड़ा सा इस सिलसिले में भी मैं अर्ज कर दूं, पोजीशन ये है कि इस वक्त जो मैनेजर्स हैं पावर सेक्टर के, उन्होंने एक नया काम शुरू कर दिया है। उन्होंने उस डिक्टम पे काम किया है, मोर वर्क मोर प्रॉब्लम्स, लेस वर्क लेस प्रॉब्लम्स, नो वर्क नो प्रॉब्लम्स। उन्होंने किया क्या है कि जिसे कहते हैं रेवेन्यू बेस्ड लोड शेडिंग स्टार्ट कर दी है। जहां से पैसे कम मिल रहे हैं उन्हें बिजली दे ही नहीं रहे। तो 5000 मेगावाट की तो इस वक्त जो है वो रेवेन्यू बेस्ड लोड शेडिंग हो रही है। एक तरफ हम कह रहे हैं कि कैपेसिटी चार्जेस बहुत ज्यादा हो गए हैं प्रोपोर्शनेट, और हम बिजली बेच नहीं पा रहे हैं। दूसरी तरफ हम रेवेन्यू बेस्ड लोड शेडिंग कर रहे हैं। तो ये भी आप ध्यान में रखिएगा। इसमें अभी अख्तर अली साहब ने बड़ी प्यारी बात की कि हमें जो इलेक्ट्रिसिटी के यूजेस हैं ये बढ़ाने पड़ेंगे। तो इस सिलसिले में ये भी आपको अर्ज कर दूं कि जो बेस्ट कन्वर्जन है एनर्जी की नेचर में जो है, उसे जब हम कन्वर्ट करते हैं तो वो बेस्ट कन्वर्जन जो है वो है ही इलेक्ट्रिसिटी में। यही वजह है कि अमेरिका में या यूरोप में या इंग्लिस्तान में आप देख रहे होंगे कि वहाँ जो इलेक्ट्रिसिटी की मार्केट है वो गैस के साथ वाय करती है और बहुत ज़्यादा जगहों में इलेक्ट्रिसिटी जीत जाती है, इसलिए कि वो बेस्ट कन्वर्शन है, वो सस्ती भी होती है। तो एक तो हम ये ज़हन में रख लें कि हमारा सरप्लस नहीं है, वो मैनिपुलेटेड है, रेवेन्यू बेस्ड लोड शेडिंग हो रही है जिसकी वजह से वो हमें समझ नहीं आ रही। और इसके बाद हम बेचना भी नहीं चाह रहे क्योंकि नो वर्क नो प्रॉब्लम्स के तहत, बजाय इसके कि उन एरिया से कलेक्शन की जाए तो फेडरल गवर्नमेंट को उठना पड़ेगा, प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट के हाथ पकड़ने पड़ेंगे या हाथ जोड़ने पड़ेंगे और फिर आगे चलना पड़ेगा। वो करने के लिए कोई तैयार नहीं। अब इस सिलसिले में मुझे थोड़ा सा वापस जाने दीजिए। न्यू दिल्ली और कराची में कोई फर्क नहीं है। जो के इलेक्ट्रिक की इश्यूज हैं वही दिल्ली में जो यूटिलिटीज थे उनके इश्यूज थे। वो इंडिया में प्राइवेटाइज किया गया और उनमें सक्सेस स्टोरी जो थी वो एनडीपीएल की थी, टाटा एंडेवर था। तो वो मुझे भी देखने, 2 दफ़ा मुझे इत्तेफाक हुआ कि मैं वहाँ जाऊँ और उन्हें स्टडी करूँ। तो घूम घुमा के मुझे समझ आई कि जो टाटाज की एंटरप्राइजिंग स्पिरिट है या एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप है, उसे एक तरफ छोड़ दीजिए, इन्वेस्टमेंट्स को भी एक तरफ छोड़ दीजिए। वो समझ आई कि वो तो सिर्फ एक औरत जो 5 फुट की थी उनकी वजह से वो एनडीपीएल जो है कामयाब हुआ। वो कौन थी? वो मिसेस दीक्षित थी जो चीफ मिनिस्टर थी इंडियन कैपिटल टेरिटरी की। शी टुक अपॉन हरसेल्फ कि मैंने इस प्राइवेटाइजेशन को सक्सीड कराना है और इसे चलाना है, चोरी भी बंद करनी है और अश्योर करना है कि सब के सब पैसे दें। हमारे यहाँ ये मिसिंग है। यहाँ हमने वतीरा या तरीका ये अख्तियार किया है कि बिजली दें ही ना जहाँ से चोरी होती है या बिजली की प्राइसेस कम देती हैं। आप इमेजिन करें कि इलेक्ट्रिक के जुरिस्डिक्शनल एरिया में 4 बलूचिस्तान के छोटे छोटे शहर आते हैं, हब है, उथल है, विंडर है, बेला है। वहाँ ये बिजली पहुंचाता ही नहीं, वो रेवेन्यू बेस्ड लोड शेडिंग के तहत बंद कर देते हैं। बेहतरीन काम हो गया और ये तरक्की कर रहे हैं। तो इसलिए ये ध्यान में रखिएगा कि सरप्लस इतना नहीं है, बहुत कम है जितना हम समझ रहे हैं। इस सिलसिले में अभी अख्तर अली साहब ने फरमाया कि 8000 मेगावाट की डिमांड है सर्दी में, जबकि 25,000 हमारे पास है। तो हमें ये ध्यान में रखना होगा कि जो मेक ओवर टाइम होता है उन प्लांट्स का जो गर्मी में आपको सप्लाई करते हैं, वो सर्दी में फिर उन्हें बंद कर दिया जाता है। इस तरीके से होता है। इसी तरह हाइड्रो भी गायब हो जाती है। तो वो 25,000 की हमारे पास कैपेबिलिटी उस वक्त होती ही नहीं है। तो इसलिए सरप्लसेस के इशू तो ये मैंने बात कर दी। अब बात आती है दूसरी जी, टैरिफ्स की। तो टैरिफ्स में कहा जाता है, जैसे राशिद अजीज साहब ने भी फरमाया कि जब पे कर रहे हैं तो ठीक है, इसका मतलब ये है कि एक्सेप्टेबल है। तो मैं थोड़ा सा अर्ज कर दूं कि जो प्रेजेंट टैरिफ्स हैं इनमें इम्प्रूडेंट कॉस्ट बहुत ज्यादा है और ये टैरिफ बहुत ज्यादा है। और इम्प्रूडेंट कॉस्ट जो है वो रिवर्स पिरामिड अगर आप खड़ा करें तो सबसे बड़ा जो उसमें कंपोनेंट है वो आईपीपीज का या जनरेशन का है, जिसमें इम्प्रूडेंट कॉस्टें जो हैं वो आगे पास ऑन की जा रही हैं। उसका प्रूफ है कि आईपीपीज ने, जिसे कहते हैं कि बिल्कुल बोले ही नहीं और जल्दी से उन्होंने कहा कि किसी तरीके से इस एग्रीमेंट को कैप किया जाए, क्योंकि अगर इस पर मजीद गौर हो गया तो इसमें तो 500 और चीजें निकलेंगी। यानी कि मैं ये समझता हूँ कि जो आईपीपीज के साथ मेमोरेंडम साइन हुआ है, एमओयू साइन हुआ है, दरअसल वो 20-25% से ज्यादा जो मसाइल हैं या इम्प्रूडेंट कॉस्ट जो हैं उनको कवर नहीं करता। 70-75% जो हैं वो तो अभी बाकी हैं। तो उन्होंने कहा जल्दी जल्दी इसे खत्म किया जाए। तो ये जो इन्वर्टेड पिरामिड है, सबसे ज्यादा इम्प्रूडेंट कॉस्ट जो है उसमें जनरेशन की है और बिलखुसूस आईपीपीज की है, इसके बाद एनटीडीसी ट्रांसको की है, और सब्सिक्वेंटली जो इम्प्रूडेंट कॉस्ट सबसे कम है वो डिस्कोस की है। हाँ, डिस्कोस की इनएफिशिएंसी का मसला है, करेक्ट, जो कलेक्शन नहीं कर सकते रेवेन्यू, और इसके बाद वहाँ लॉसेस भी हैं, यानी कि एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लॉसेस या चोरी हैं। उस सिलसिले में जो आउटरीच प्रोग्राम गवर्नमेंट का होना चाहिए, फेडरल गवर्नमेंट का, जो ओनर्स हैं कि प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट और लोकल गवर्नमेंट्स को भी वो साथ लें और आगे चलें, वो है नहीं है। वो हमें करना पड़ेगा वरना काम नहीं बनेगा। इसके बाद हम आ जाते हैं जी, बड़ी सीधी सी बात है कि एग्जाम्पल आपको देता हूँ कि हमें कहा गया कि नए आईपीपीज हमने लेने, और जो हमने स्कीमें बना के भेजी जो पब्लिक सेक्टर के प्लांट्स थे कि इन्होंने रिटायर हो जाना है, अब इनएफिशिएंट हो गए हैं, इसमें तमाम चीजें हैं, मासवाई द पावर प्लांट इटसेल्फ, उसके बाद जितने कॉन्डिमेंट्स होते हैं कि यानी कि रियल एस्टेट है, ऑफटेक के लिए ट्रांसमिशन लाइंस हैं, जो पानी का इस्तेमाल अगर वहाँ है तो वो पानी के लिए जो आउटलेट्स हैं वो दिए गए हैं, हाउसिंग कॉलोनीज हैं वगैरह वगैरह, ये सारी चीजें हैं। तो ये यहाँ इसको लीज आउट करें या पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप की तरफ जाएं, उस तरफ कोई नहीं गया। उन्होंने कहा नहीं नहीं इसकी भी हमें जरूरत है, और आईपीपीज आ गए, और अब वन फाइन मॉर्निंग बता दिया गया ये सारे बंद कर दिए गए, और ये नहीं बताया कि उनके साथ हमने करना क्या है। बंद तो कर दिए, अब करना क्या है, जबकि वो कुल 40 से 60% मजीद कॉस्ट लगा के जो आजकल लगाई जाती है उन्हीं पावर स्टेशन, उन्हीं एस्टेट्स में नए पावर स्टेशन पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप्स या प्राइवेट पार्टीज ही लगा लें, लीज आउट किए जा सकते थे। अब बात आती है जी प्राइवेटाइजेशन की। जैसे अख्तर अली साहब ने भी प्राइवेटाइजेशन की बात की, और सब्सिक्वेंटली थोड़ा सा उन्होंने जिक्र कर दिया सेकंड ईयर बिजनेस का, कि जो वायर बिजनेस में आ जाएंगी हमारी डिस्कोस। तो इस सिलसिले में मैं अर्ज कर दूं कि जो रेगुलेटर है हमारा, उसने प्राइवेटाइजेशन को डी फैक्टो सील कर दिया। वो आया है और उसने ये कहा है कि आप डिस्कोस जो हैं वो वायर बिजनेस में चले जाएंगी, वो एक्चुअल डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन में नहीं होंगी, वो अपनी वायर्स ऑफर करेंगी प्राइवेट सेक्टर को, और इसके बाद वो बेचेंगे और फुल रिकवरी वो करेंगे। और जाहिर है ये एक आंसर भी है, क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट जो है उसकी कैपेसिटी भी कम है, कैपेबिलिटी भी नहीं है, और मजे की बात यह है कि दे आर नॉट इवन विलिंग कि किसी तरीके से हम अश्योर करें कि यूटिलिटीज जो हैं वो अपना रेवेन्यू कलेक्ट कर सकें। तो इस वजह से समझ ये आती है कि हमें ये सारी चीजें सामने रखनी होंगी। इसके बाद जल्द अज जल्द जो है वो डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कंपनीज को वायर बिजनेस में लाया जाए, वीन ऑफ किया जाए प्रेजेंट सिस्टम में से, उस तरफ लेके जाया जाए, और फिर जो है प्राइवेट सेक्टर बीच में आ जाए जो इनकी वायर्स को ले लेगा, लोगों को बिजली देगा, और जाहिर है जितनी बिजली देगा उसकी पेमेंट स्टेट को करेगा। नतीजतन ये जो सर्कुलर डेट के इश्यूज हैं ये रुक जाते हैं। लेकिन इस सब को करने के लिए जो मेन या मूट पॉइंट आता है वो है मैनेजमेंट पावर सेक्टर की। इस वक्त मैनेजमेंट जो है, जो पहले किसी जमाने में वापडा के पास हुआ करती थी, और बहुत अरसा मासवाए जब आईपीपीज का इंडक्शन हुआ लेट 90s में तो फिर गड़बड़ होगी, उससे पहले बेहतरीन चल रहे थे। तो वापडा से वो चला पेप्को के पास, पेप्को को गैर फाल बनाया गया, और इसके बाद कहा गया कि डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कंपनीज जो हैं उनके बोर्ड चलाएंगे। बोर्ड में एक भी प्रोफेशनल नहीं है, और डी फैक्टो हमने टेक ओवर कर लिया, यानी कि मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ वाटर एंड पावर ने पहले, और आजकल वो पावर डिवीजन के पास है। अब बताइए कि वो प्रोफेशनल्स नहीं है, हैंड्स डाउन उनका एक्सपीरियंस नहीं है। जो कंपनीज हैं सारी, जिनमें जेनकोस भी हैं, एनटीडीसी भी है और डिस्कोस भी हैं, उनके बोर्ड्स जो हैं वो नॉन प्रोफेशनल हैं टोटली। और वो मैं रेंट सीकर्स तो नहीं कहूँगा, लेकिन ये है कि वो रोज़ अपने छोटे छोटे मसाइल में मेरा मीटर चेंज कर दो, मेरा ये कर दो, फलां की प्रोक्योरमेंट को फौकियत दे दो, वही बेचारे करते रहते हैं। तो इसलिए मैनेजमेंट को दुरुस्त होना पड़ेगा। इस सिलसिले में शकील दुरानी साहब ने अच्छी बात की कि अब एक होल्डिंग कम मैनेजमेंट, मैं कहूँगा कि कुछ देर के लिए इसे मैनेज करना पड़ेगा, जब तक डिस्कोज जो हैं उन्हें हम भेज नहीं देते वायर बिजनेस में, होल्डिंग कम मैनेजमेंट कंपनी जो है वो पेप्को बनी हुई है, उसी को बनाएं, उसे हेड करें एमिनेंट प्रोफेशनल, जो उसके चेयरमैन आ जाएं, सीईओ भी उसका प्राइवेट सेक्टर या पब्लिक सेक्टर से लेके आए, और उसका बोर्ड भी प्रोफेशनल्स पे मुश्तमिल हो, और इसके बाद वो उसे लेके आगे चले, और एक फायरवॉल ड्रॉ कर दी जाए मिनिस्ट्री, और इसके साथ मिनिस्ट्री अपनी पॉलिसीज बताए, पॉलिसीज को लेके आगे चला जाए। तो ये छोटी छोटी बातें थी जो मैं क्लियर करना चाहता था। अदरवाइज सभी ने बहुत बातें की और एक बड़ा ही मीनिंगफुल ये वेबिनार हुआ। मैं शुक्रिया अदा करूंगा डॉक्टर साहब का, नदीम उल हक साहब का, कि वो इसके पीछे पड़े रहते हैं और सबको इकट्ठा करते हैं। शुक्रिया।
Thank you very much, Chima Saab. Thank you very much. As always, you've summed it up well. Folks, any questions, please raise your hands. Otherwise, I'll go back to people from the panel or even a round table. Anybody wants to say anything? I see Ahmed.
Nadeem Saab, may I?
Ahmed Saab, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nadeem Saab. So
Another World Banker who must do mea culpa.
No, actually, Rashid Saab can tell you I stayed away from energy until the last 3 years in the bank. So I don't claim to be one
Very
who messed up the
convenient that we
Pakistan.
should all try and pretend we are not responsible, someone else is. This is a
No, at least in Pakistan, sir, matlab, anyways, let me get to the point. I mean, I think what Bisharat Saab is saying, and I missed the early part, but I've been here for the last hour. देखिए, प्रॉब्लम जो है इलेक्ट्रिसिटी की और जो हमारी यहाँ डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की, वो ये है कि हम लोग डिफरेंट टियर्स ऑफ मैनेजमेंट को मिला देते हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल, द डिसीजन और द पॉलिसी दैट वी आर गोइंग टू हैव अ सिंगल एनर्जी सोर्स happens at a much higher level and then gets communicated, and therefore everyone else works. The mixing that up with the power sector debt issue and all the multiple issues, I think we need to segregate the issues and keep them at the place where they are. That's the first point. Second point is, I have been traveling a lot around Pakistan, and I am now firmly convinced, as I go through a lot of rural and semi-rural and small towns, that moving to a single energy source, i.e. electricity, as somebody else also mentioned, is actually the right thing to do for the future. So we should take it out of people's minds that yahan gas aayegi ya ye aayega. Let me give you an example of all of GB. All of GB में आपको ये पता है कि there are multiple sectors that are paying the cost of basically having multiple energy sources. यानी वहाँ बिजली भी पहुँचाई जा रही है, वहाँ लद के these क्या कहते हैं LNG cylinders भी जा रहे हैं, and firewood भी कट रही है. So the thing is, the country needs to get out of this 20th century thinking and make a firm decision that electricity and only electrons across the wire is what is going to be your energy source. चपातियाँ बनानी है, बस ऐसी ही बनानी पड़ेगी. So second thing, so this requires a tradition, letting go of some traditional things. Just because we had gas, we will give more gas. Forget that. I think we need to. Second thing is, I don't hear, I heard this thing about national, क्या हम सारे पाकिस्तानी नहीं हैं, तो क्या सारा US नहीं है? I mean, isn't it a federation of states? यानी ये कहना कि जी वो बिजली उधर जाया हो रही है, उसको नहीं जा रही है. भाई प्रोविंसेस अगर 18th अमेंडमेंट में आप लोगों ने उसको डिवॉल्व किया है, तो उनको इख्तियार दें कि वो अपनी ट्रांसमिशन, जनरेशन, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सब कुछ खुद करें. क्योंकि ये अब एक आर्केक कॉन्सेप्ट हो गया कि मैंने 1200 किलोमील दूर बिजली बनानी है और उसको यहाँ भेजना है, and I'm going to incur all the costs, etc. Third point, devolution per se in electricity, especially electrification, is totally incomplete. Yani provinces are making a mess. And let me give you one, and this is the last point I'm to make. I was in Ministry of Railways this morning, and looking at their accounts, thanks to Nadeem Saab, who loves free labor and also does slave labor. So he sent me there. I sat with the minister, the secretary, and Shakil Saab, I remembered your days. But anyhow, talking to the secretary very proudly told me that half their revenues since the last 2 years, half the freight revenues are coming from one power plant's operation, which is, guess what, Sahiwal, right? Now think about how poorly planned this effing government is, that you have an environmentally damaging plus an expensive producing plant which was bought in second hand, hence you're buying expensively, hence you also have captive, you have to buy, then you incur higher costs, then you have modest revenues, therefore you have the debt. Now, on the other hand, the railway department is sitting pretty and saying, Ahmed, don't say anything against this because I'm making 34 billion rupees a month from the transmitting the coal. Nadeem Saab, I beg to ask you this question. Who thinks about the entire set of issues in the government? And I think, therefore, one of the things about Lexity that I have been starting to disaggregate is that somehow we got to look at the delivery and the production. If I can put it in very industrial terms, that unless we start looking at it like that and go back to having a policy decision that we're going to have a point source and that point source, single source is going to be Lexity, I think most of our problems are going to disappear slowly and steadily because we have to get out of this tradition. Demand, supply, very nice debate. I agree with Bisharat Saab that actually there is demand and the demand is ongoing because the economy is not, and also with Rashid Saab, demand is going up. Abhi humne pura GB Chitral ka survey kiya informally through our Khan Rural Support Program. Demand's shooting up every year. This thing about saying demand is going to be less is ridiculous. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Amir Saab. Thank you very much. Perceptive, yes. Let's go ahead and see if we can get a few more questions, and I'll come back to the panel. Please, folks, note and let's see. Come back to the panel. Folks, please be short, very short, because we're running out of time. We're already too late. Shahina Nisar.
Okay, I think the real problem in Pakistan is that there's too much generation capacity which is there, and now all types of explanations are being given, and I feel very uncomfortable when I hear electricity being a public good. I become very uncomfortable when I see, oh, we have to increase demand, because you want to sell the generation power which is already there. So it's a good idea, as Amir Durrani has said, that you have to have some sort of a central entity to look after the whole situation. But then that should be worked by different types of professionals. I think there's no business of bureaucrats running all these organizations. There is a big issue with debt and all that. We have to promote efficiencies. We have to rationalize the tariffs. It makes no sense that the world is, in the whole world, there is declining tariffs, prices, and Pakistan is suffering with all that. And I cannot understand how GDP growth is, I can go on and on, but I have seen,
we've got
I think there are so many conflicting messages coming from each speaker, and I think these should be resolved.
Agreed. Good point, Shahina. Okay, Alauddin Ahmed Khan Sahab. Alauddin Sahab. Alauddin Sahab is here or not? Alauddin Sahab, unmute yourself.
Yes, can you read me now?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you very much, Nadisa, for giving me the opportunity for my question. I think I have a two-pronged strategy to, suggest to the panel, to this forum. In the short term, I think we should look at our efficiencies. There are efficiencies issues all over the system, in the distribution, in the grid also. We have a very, very old technologies in the grid stations and in the distribution also. Let's not talk about the thefts and other things. As the world is now looking into the future, we need to do our paradigm shifting and look at the renewable energy technologies and energies. The whole of the world is taking position in the renewable energy and their technologies. What are we doing about it? For example, electric vehicle technologies. Every country has given their vision and the timelines, 2025, 2030, and we are just sitting. And I think solarization, Pakistan, is the solution in our energy problems. And if we look at the energy mix today, so the message is not there. We are depending mostly on the thermal power solutions. As I think already a panel somebody has said, it's our imported fuel. When we have a lot of renewable energy sources available, I think it's a time to exploit them, and we should have a vision based 2050 or whatever. These are my points.
Sound नहीं clear आ रहा, so I don't think people are understanding very much.
We can't.
But we leave it at that. Gul Hassan Saab, Gul Hassan Bhutto Saab, last question, please go ahead, but keep it very short.
सर थैंक यू वेरी मच। मेरे जस्ट छोटे से सवालात होंगे क्योंकि थोड़ा सा मैं लिटिल कंफ्यूज हो गया हूँ, जिसके सेक्शन में वो जाता जाए तो थोड़ा सा अख्तर साहब प्राइवेटाइजेशन की बात करते हैं और जो है चीमा साहब ने राइटली उनको कहा, तो वहां से सवाल ये आता है कि जब आप प्राइवेटाइज नहीं करते, वायर एंड पोल को आप सेपरेट करते हैं, तो रिटेल मॉडल आ रहा है सीटीबीसीएम में। सीटीबीसीएम में तो कोई ऐसी बात ही नहीं हो रही। हम किस चीज की बात करें? सीटीबीसीएम में तो सिर्फ बायलैटरल की बात हो रही है। तो ऐसा तो नहीं कि हम यहाँ पे डिबेट कर रहे हैं लेकिन पेपर में तो ऐसा कुछ नहीं हो रहा। अगर किसी को पता है तो मुझे थोड़ा सा हमें वहां पे गाइड कर दें। एक साइड पे हम एक्सक्लूसिविटी की बात करें कि उसके एंड करने की बात हो रही, एक साइड पे एक्सक्लूसिविटी की बात।
हाँ जी, माइक अपना बंद कर दें जी अगर आप बात नहीं कर रहे तो। बोलिए गुल साहब, जल्दी से करें।
जी सर, जी सर। दूसरा सर, एक साइड पे कंफ्लिक्टिंग सिग्नल है, एक साइड पे हम एक्सक्लूसिविटी एंड करने की बात कर रहे हैं ताकि उधर से जो है रिटेल मॉडल आ जाए। तो कई को खौफ किस चीज से? नेटवर्क तो उसके पास रहना है और जो है खुद कंपीट करे सर्विस प्रोवाइडर, तो वो उनका खौफ क्या है इसके एंड में। फिर दूसरी साइड्स पे हम दूसरा ये आईजी सेप की बात हो रही है और इधर पावर पूल से निकल के हमने कंपटीशन में पावर एक्सचेंज में जाना है। तो फिर ये आईजी से 40 अगले 20 साल के लिए जो है और लॉन्ग टर्म प्लानिंग की जा रही है और पीपीआईबी की प्रोक्योरमेंट अभी भी कंटिन्यू टेकर पे 2015 की पॉलिसी पे, एईडीबी की पॉलिसी 2020 में अभी ये पॉलिसी आई है, वो भी लॉन्ग टर्म रिन्यूएबल के लिए 15 साल पे। तो ये हो क्या रहा है? डिफरेंट मैसेजेस आ रहे हैं, ना पॉलिसी ना रेगुलेटरी फ्रेमवर्क, ये तमाम चीजें एक दूसरे से अलाइनमेंट इनकी कहीं पे भी नहीं है। हम तो यहाँ कंसेंसस बिल्ड करके बैठे हुए हैं कि कंपटीशन को तो सारे नोच रहे हैं आगे पीछे, प्रैक्टिकली तो कुछ भी ग्राउंड पे नहीं होता। ये फोरम पेपर
कह रहे हैं गुल साहब, बिल्कुल आप ठीक कह रहे हैं। ना पॉलिसी है, ना रेगुलेशन है, ना आपके पास इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है, ना एफिशिएंसी, कुछ भी नहीं है। द सेक्टर इज नॉट कॉन्फ़िगर्ड एट ऑल। क्यों जी? शैल आई कम बैक टू एहसन साहब? एहसन साहब, वुड यू लाइक टू से एनीथिंग ऑन दिस? व्हाट डू वी डू? इट्स ऑल राइट टू हैव all these things, but what can we do? We really don't have a power sector. We have a government that's messing up everything. ये अभी कह रहे थे अपना अख्तर साहब के मीटर्स, मुझे समझ नहीं आती मीटर्स हमें लोन लेके क्यों लेना है। मैं अपना मीटर खुद नहीं ले सकता? मैं बार बार दिखाता हूँ, मेरे पास मीटर पड़ा है, मेरा ये सेल फोन, ये मीटर है, मैंने खुद खरीदा हुआ है। मैं अपना मीटर खुद क्यों नहीं खरीद सकता? मुझे वापटा के गंदे मीटर्स क्यों लेने होते हैं? बिकॉज देयर इज अ मीटर माफिया दैट इज सेलिंग मीटर्स। बताइए जी, एहसन साहब, वुड यू लाइक टू से समथिंग?
जी, गुलशन भुट्टो साहब ने जो
क्लोजिंग रिमार्क्स,
जी सीटीबीसीएम पे जो उन्होंने बात की है, दैट टॉक्स अबाउट कंपेटिटिव ट्रेड बायलैटरल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट मार्केट, ये उसकी एब्रीविएशन है। और इस पे इफ यू वांट टू गो टुवर्ड्स कंपेटिटिव मार्केट, जिसकी हम होलसेल की बात कर रहे हैं, कंपेटिटिव की बात कर रहे हैं, अख्तर अली साहब ने बात की, 3-4 लोगों ने बात की, सबने कि अल्टीमेट है उस पे जाने का द फर्स्ट baby step that you can take is to remove the exclusivity with CPPAG and allowing various parties, whether they are private or public तो जैसे अख्तर साहब कह रहे थे public करें ठीक है, लेकिन अगर private भी interested हैं तो आप bilateral agreements की तरफ आपको जाना चाहिए और bilateral agreement से ही आपकी मार्केट ओपन और टेस्ट होगी। सो यू नीड टू डू अ पायलट विद दोज पीपल हु आर विलिंग टू डू इट। एंड इन माय ओपिनियन ये 4-5 साल में स्टेबिलिटी के साथ कंपैरेटिव मार्केट आ जाएगी, बट यू हैव टू स्टार्ट समवेयर। तो बायलैटरल अरेंजमेंट्स के थ्रू जाना चाहिए। आई डोंट सी एनी क्लैश इन व्हाट पीपल आर सेइंग। पीपल आर सेइंग द सेम थिंग इन डिफरेंट वेज, दैट्स व्हाट आई फील। और मेरे कंक्लूडिंग रिमार्क्स जो होंगे इस सेशन पे वो ये कि वी ऑल एग्री that a central competent body to look after discourse should be there. Involvement of provinces is necessary. To what extent can be questioned कि वो public private partnership में हो discourse के साथ, law and order को facilitate करने के लिए हो, but involvement of provinces के बगैर चीमा साहब ने भी किया काम करना मुश्किल है। And then, reducing government's involvement. अभी बहुत ज़्यादा government involved है, सारा risk भी government लेती है. मेरे ख्याल से they should be restricted to policy only and regulatory, setup. And going forward, as I said, other than this competitive market, all future projects should be, we must consider indigenous fuel for those projects. Indigenous fuel पे projects को लगाएं, renewable पे projects को लगाएं. Because ultimately you need security on supply chain, you need, security on your foreign exchange. So in सब foreign exchange का मसला, supply chain का मसला, low cost fuel का मसला, because एक nation की story जो होती है वो long term story होती है. Short term आप measures लेते हैं, but जब किसी मुल्क के बारे में, nation के बारे में बात करते हैं तो आप तो long term बात करते हैं. और long term बात करने के लिए I would say कि indigenous fuels की तरफ जाना चाहिए और सारे projects पे base करने चाहिए. And with these words, Nadeem Saab, I think excellent webinar. My appreciation for all those people who have organized this, and thank you very much to all the panelists from my side. I think very healthy discussion today.
May I just have 1 minute?
Sorry, Shakil Saab, go ahead. Shakil Saab, go ahead.
Just 1 minute.
Did you go ahead?
Yes. I quite agree. This has been a very informative get-together. The views expressed were innovative. May I request you that just having a webinar and 80 people watching it might not be good enough. Why don't you put in a 4-page report for the government? Maybe you could associate Akhtar Ali Saab or Chima Saab and just put a 4-page report. Anything beyond that, no one is going to read. So इनमें जो main issues हैं, आप ये government को planning commission को दें. I'm sure they'll be able to focus on these because these are great issues. Just one-liner about circular debt. Circular debt, yes, it is a provinces must get on board, and PEPCO must pay the provinces for the recoveries. And we have done it. I've spent half of my career in the field, in the tribal areas and the settled districts. And when the provincial government wishes to recover, it can recover. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shakil Saab. Thank you very much. G, anybody else?
Can I just answer a few points?
Go ahead.
Okay, because K Electric was specifically addressed. So first of all, with respect to SSGC, we don't contribute to circular debt. There is a receivables issue which is under litigation, but if you ask SSGC, they'll tell you that we are one of their best customers. We have paid all our current bills, and the fact is that they've been asking for markup on previous arrears, and that is in litigation at the moment. They are the ones who actually terminated the installment plan through which we were paying off the arrears. So that's an old standing issue which is under litigation. Secondly, with respect to cherry picking, I mean, we welcome competition. Let me be very clear about that. What we're concerned about is that there should be a proper transitionary framework to allow that competition so that there is a level playing field for everyone, and so that more vulnerable customers are also catered for, because otherwise there will be cherry picking. Now, you talked about Uthal and Vindo. We do supply electricity. There are vast areas. They are very inaccessible. We supply electricity. We're increasing our solar projects there. And the fact is that they are difficult areas. They're inaccessible. There's a law and order issue. There are various geographical issues there. Finally, just to wrap up, what we'd like to do is see reform in this sector. We'd like to, we always cooperate with the national policy. That's what we'd like to see. We want to see lower tariffs, but there has to be T&D reform for that. And we need to upgrade the grid so that K Electric and others can absorb that excess capacity from NTDC, and that's what we're investing in. So what we see is a planned investment supported by fair, open, transparent regulatory frameworks and a national energy policy. Thank you.
G, thank you. G, anybody else?
Nadeem, I'd like to say a few words.
Go ahead, Rashid Saab, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, okay. What I want to stress here is 2 or 3 things. One is, I've heard lots of views, but I do not believe we have consensuses. I believe we have individual opinions, individual ideas, and they're being told as the final thing. Unfortunately, that's not going to work. Let me give you just one example. We've heard a number of times somebody strong, a central body to control the discourse, etc., etc. You, Nadeem, should answer me. Isn't that going to be another control institution, or isn't that going to be, by its very nature, the DMGs in the Ministry of Power taking control over, and we will have been contributing to that idea of they take control and they run it as their own fiefdom. So that's a refrain I have about we invariably are expressing our own opinions, not accepting not considering that there's a need for a consensus between us and or my own opinion and others' opinions. Let's have this 4-pager, this small report that Durrani Sahab mentioned as a consensus report. Otherwise, tough luck, it'll remain on somebody's desk because they'll ask me and I'll say, I don't think it's a good idea. And someone else will say, yeah, it's a good idea. And the guy will then be, so, okay, that's one side of it. Consensus building is not being practiced. But the second thing which I want to come to, personnel in the ministry willing to accept the change. You remember this conversation also happened 2 seminars back or something. In the banking sector, we were able to identify and we appointed managers of the utility who were able to then take their institutions to a reform, to a complete restructuring, etc., etc. Well, I'm going to throw the onus back on you. Find such people for the power sector. I'm going to say, for example, that there were examples. I mean, Marine will probably be able to confirm to you, to all. People like Tabish Gauhar, Naveed Ismail, etc., inducted in KESC. They worked 3 years, 5 years, etc., etc., even in the ministry, even in K Electric, etc. They are the high flyers of AES, one of the biggest power companies in the US. If they can be successful there, then what is the reason why they can't be? People can be found for the utilities. The steel wall or the brick wall in the ministry, where someone is not willing to devolve decision making to the company managements, please find us some people who can be considered for those ministerial level positions where they will allow these companies to perform according to their capability, according to their regulatory requirements, etc., etc. Otherwise, the ministry will keep on managing, keep on controlling, and the current situation will continue.
Thank you, Rashid Saab. Thank you very much. Ji, anybody else, folks? Chima Saab, would you like to sum it up?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We've had a very, very good session. And of course, as Rashid Aziz said, we need to get together for that write-up.
Nadeem Saab, may I?
Nadeem, please go ahead. Go ahead, Ji, go ahead.
I think, as I understand, the government is reviving PEPCO and a holding company is being formed. And that appears to be a good step because at least it would transfer power from the ministry to professionals. I hope professionals would be engaged to run PEPCO. So it's a good step. I also suggest that GENCOs should also be included in PEPCO. So there is one holding company which handles all these public enterprises, and gradually these companies are privatized in the form of leasing. As again Durrani Sahab has suggested, leasing is a very viable solution for privatization. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you very much. I think we learned a lot. It's wonderful. I will end by saying that Einstein had said 50 years ago, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Fortunately, it happened before Pakistan was born, because Einstein would have to say something about Pakistan then, because we keep rebuilding Pepco, destroying Pepco, buying wheat, not buying wheat, closing down sugar, building sugar, making IPPs, not making IPPs. The only thing that we won't do is think. Shakil Sahab, I like your point. I take it. Would any of you please give us anything that you like? We are summarizing these talks. We are putting these talks on YouTube. But I would welcome if all of you or any of you are willing to. In fact, maybe that's the way forward. Can we get together and set up an energy reform charter that all of us will sign? If you guys are agreeable, I'll get PID to do the necessary work, and then all of us will work for a few meetings and then sign an energy charter that we can give to the government on how to move forward. If you guys agree, then I will initiate that today. Inshallah, we'll send you a brief outline of this in the next few days, and then we will be, at your command. You help us think it through. We will just be merely an agency that will kind of put it together for you. It will come out in your names. You are the signatories, the major leading power thinkers, and we will put out an energy plan to the government. Whether they like it or not, let's do our duty. If that's agreeable, folks, I'll close.
My question to you will be, if you put out a draft, will you get not 73 different views and 73 different comments?
Let's work it out. I'm happy to work it out. You should agree that we will sit down and spend a few hours trying to work it out. Let's try and do it. Why do we wait for the government to invite us to a committee? Why can't we do it on our own? Let's try it out. I'm happy to. Let me also tell you, I'm trying out to make a growth framework with a bunch of economists. I'm doing that already. And we've done that once before for COVID, and we did reach some sort of an agreement. Yes, everything is not neat and clean, but let's try it out. So with your agreement, let me close this now, and we'll try and do that. Thank you, folks. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have always learned from you. Thank you, Ji.
Thank you, Nadeem. Thank you, Nadeem. Great job, man. Bye.
Thank you.